Every parent knows the ache of watching their child be invisible to the world. For Rowan, a 49-year-old single father, that pain was his daily companion as he raised Elin, his 9-year-old deaf daughter, in a world that rarely paused to see her. At a busy gala filled with wealthy strangers, he watched people talk past her as if she weren't there. Then a woman in a luxurious suit walked over and started signing to Elin. His daughter's face lit up with pure joy. For the first time all night, someone truly saw her. But who was this woman? And how would one simple act of kindness change everything for a father who had been fighting this battle alone? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's buzz pulled Rowan from a restless sleep at 5:30 in the morning. He reached over and silenced it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for years. The apartment was still dark, quiet in that particular way that only early mornings possess. He sat up slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back, a souvenir from years of physical labor, and rubbed his eyes. Their apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The rent was reasonable, which in this city meant it was barely affordable. The walls were thin enough that he could hear Mrs. Chen upstairs shuffling around her kitchen, beginning her own morning routine. But it was home. He'd made sure of that. Rowan padded to the kitchen in his worn slippers, the linoleum floor cold even through the fabric. He started the coffee maker, an old model that gurgled and hissed like it was personally offended by the task, and began preparing breakfast. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, the cereal box that Elin preferred because it had a cartoon character she found amusing. He poured the milk carefully, the way she liked it, just enough to soften the cereal without making it soggy. While the coffee brewed, his eyes drifted to the collection of handmade flashcards scattered across the small kitchen table. They were worn at the edges, some held together with tape, others showing the fingerprints of countless practice sessions. Each card displayed a word in English on one side and the corresponding sign language gesture illustrated on the other. Elin had helped him make them when she was 5 years old, her small hands carefully coloring the illustrations, while he wrote out the words in his neatest printing. Those cards represented something deeper than vocabulary lessons. They were proof of his commitment, evidence of the thousands of hours he'd spent learning to communicate with his daughter in her language. Not every hearing parent made that effort. He'd met enough of them at support groups over the years, the ones who expected their deaf children to adapt entirely to the hearing world, who saw sign language as a crutch rather than a bridge. The coffee finished brewing, and Rowan poured himself a cup black with 1 sugar. He'd given up cream years ago when money got tight. Small sacrifices. He'd made hundreds of them. He thought back to the diagnosis, delivered in a sterile medical office when Elin was only 2 years old. The audiologist had been kind but direct. Profound sensorineural hearing loss, bilateral, permanent. The words had hit him like physical blows. Even though he and his wife, Laura, her name was Laura, had suspected something was wrong for months. Elin hadn't responded to sounds the way other toddlers did. She didn't turn when they called her name. She didn't startle at loud noises. Laura had left when Elin was 3, not immediately after the diagnosis, but close enough that the connection was obvious. She'd tried, he gave her that much credit. She'd tried for nearly a year. But the reality of raising a deaf child, the specialist appointments, the early intervention programs, the constant advocacy, the exhaustion, it had worn her down. Or maybe she'd never really wanted to be a mother in the first place, and Elin's deafness had simply given her an acceptable excuse to leave. The divorce papers had arrived on a Thursday. She'd moved to another state within a month. The child support payments came irregularly, and Rowan had long since stopped counting on them for anything essential. He'd been 26 when Elin was born, young enough to still have dreams, old enough to know he'd probably never achieve them. He'd been 2 years into an architecture program at the community college, working nights at a warehouse to pay for classes. His professors had told him he had talent, a good eye for spatial design and an intuitive understanding of how people moved through buildings. Then Elin had arrived unplanned but not unwanted, and the architecture classes had become impossible to maintain. He'd switched to full-time work, first at the warehouse, then as a maintenance supervisor at a commercial building downtown. Steady hours, decent benefits, enough to keep them afloat if he was careful. The dreams of designing buildings had faded into something he thought about late at night when he couldn't sleep, when he let himself wonder about the life he might have had. But those thoughts were indulgent, useless. He had Elin, that was enough. It had to be. He heard her door open and turned to see his daughter emerging from her room, hair mussed from sleep, wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with stars that she'd insisted on, even though they were getting too small. She was growing so fast, 9 years old now, and sometimes he looked at her and couldn't believe how much time had passed. She spotted him, and her face broke into a smile. Her hands moved in the morning greeting they'd established years ago, a simple wave, followed by the sign for good morning, and then Dad. He signed back, his movements slower than hers, but still fluent after years of practice. They sat together at the small kitchen table, and she started eating her cereal with enthusiasm. Rowan sipped his coffee and watched her the way he always did. She had Laura's dark hair and his grey eyes, but everything else about her was entirely her own. She was perceptive, funny in a quiet way, and more resilient than any child should have to be. She told him about a dream she'd had, something involving a talking dog and a magical library, her hands moving expressively as she signed. He responded with questions, drawing out the details, making her laugh. This was their morning ritual, this back-and-forth conversation in the silent language they shared. It was sacred time, unrushed despite the schedule ahead, but as he watched her, he couldn't shake a familiar worry that had been growing stronger lately. She was doing well in her mainstream school, had learned to advocate for herself with her teachers, used an interpreter during classes. But socially, she struggled. The other children didn't know how to communicate with her. During recess, she often stood alone, watching the other kids play, but not quite part of their world. He'd seen it himself when he'd volunteered as a chaperone on a field trip last month. The other children weren't cruel. They simply didn't know how to include her. And Elin, too proud to force herself into spaces where she wasn't understood, had spent most of the day walking beside him instead of with her classmates. It broke his heart in ways he couldn't fully articulate. After breakfast, they both got ready for the day. Rowan put on his work uniform, navy blue pants and a matching shirt with his name embroidered on the pocket, while Elin changed into her school clothes. He packed her lunch, made sure her homework was in her backpack, checked that she had her communication device charged and ready. They walked together to the bus stop, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. The morning was crisp, autumn air carrying the promise of winter. Other parents and children gathered at the stop, engaged in conversations that Rowan and Elin existed beside, but not quite within. The bus arrived, and Elin boarded with a quick wave to him. He watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, then turned to walk the 6 blocks to the subway station that would take him to work. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Kieran, his co-worker and closest friend. Coffee before shift. Got something to run by you. They met at the small cafe near the building where they both worked. Kieran was already there, a large man with an easy smile and the kind of presence that made everyone around him feel comfortable. He'd been Rowan's friend for 5 years, ever since Rowan had started working at the building. Kieran was one of the few people who'd made an effort to learn some basic signs so he could communicate directly with Elin on the occasions when she'd visited the workplace. "So," Kieran said as Rowan slid into the booth across from him, "you know that charity gala the building owner is hosting next week?" Rowan nodded. The entire maintenance staff had been briefed on it. They'd been preparing the event space for weeks. He's giving out tickets to staff. Extra ones. "I got 2, but my sister's visiting that week, so I can't go." Kieran pushed an envelope across the table. "Thought you might want them." "You and Elin." Rowan stared at the envelope like it might bite him. A gala? I know. Not your scene, but hear me out. It's for children's education programs. Free food. You'd get to see how the other half lives for an evening, and Elin might enjoy getting dressed up. When's the last time you two did something like that? We don't exactly have gala clothes. There's a rental place 2 blocks from here. I already checked. They do same-day service. Kieran's expression turned more serious. Look, man, I know you work hard. I know everything you do is for that little girl. But maybe it'd be good for both of you to do something different. Something that isn't just survival. The words hit harder than Kieran probably intended. Survival. Yes, that's what their life had been. A series of carefully managed days, each one focused on making it to the next. Rowan picked up the envelope, felt the weight of the cardstock invitations inside. I wouldn't know what to say to those people, so don't say much. Eat the free food. Let Elin see something new. You don't have to be best friends with anyone there. That evening, after he'd picked Elin up from school and they'd had dinner, spaghetti, her favorite, he showed her the invitations. Her eyes went wide. A real party? She signed. A real party, he confirmed. Her excitement was immediate and infectious. She wanted to know everything. What people would wear, what the food would be like if there would be music. He answered as best he could, watching her face light up with each detail. Later, after she'd gone to bed, he stood in the doorway of her room and watched her sleep. The invitation sat on his dresser, and he kept looking at it with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He wanted to give her this, wanted her to experience something beyond their small apartment and her careful routine. But he also knew what places like that were like, the subtle judgments, the way people looked past you if you didn't fit their expectations. Still, for Elin's sake, he'd go. He'd rent a suit that almost fit. He'd practice small talk in the mirror, and he'd give his daughter one evening where she could feel like she belonged somewhere bigger than their quiet life. He had no way of knowing that this decision would change everything. The Grand Meridian Hotel rose 30 stories above the city streets, its glass facade reflecting the evening sky in shades of amber and gold. Rowan felt out of place the moment they stepped through the revolving doors into the marble lobby. His rented suit fit reasonably well, though the shoulders were slightly too broad and the pants a touch too long. Elin wore a deep blue dress they'd found at a consignment shop. It was beautiful on her, made her eyes look even brighter. She gripped his hand tightly as they followed the signs directing guests to the ballroom on the 3rd floor. Other attendees moved past them with the easy confidence of people accustomed to events like this. The women wore gowns that probably cost more than Rowan's monthly rent. The men's suits were tailored perfectly, their shoes polished to a mirror shine. The ballroom itself was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling, painted with classical frescoes. Round tables draped in ivory cloth filled the space, each one topped with elaborate centerpieces of white roses and flickering candles. A string quartet played softly from a raised platform near the back. Waiters circulated with silver trays bearing champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Rowan glanced down at Elin. Her eyes were wide, taking in every detail. She signed to him. "It's like a palace." "It is beautiful," he signed back, managing a smile despite his discomfort. They found their assigned table near the middle of the room. The other seats were already occupied by couples who looked at them with polite but distant expressions. Rowan nodded in greeting and helped Elin into her chair. He attempted small talk with the man seated to his right, a silver-haired executive who worked in commercial real estate. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by awkward pauses as the man kept glancing at his phone. Throughout the evening, Rowan noticed a pattern that made his chest tighten with familiar frustration. People addressed him, but looked through Elin as if she were invisible. When he introduced her, "This is my daughter, Elin," they would smile vaguely in her direction and immediately return their attention to him or to someone else. A woman seated across from them launched into a story about her own children, speaking directly to Rowan while completely ignoring Elin's presence. When Elin tugged on Rowan's sleeve to ask him a question in sign language, the woman paused mid-sentence. her expression flickering with something between curiosity and discomfort. Before continuing, as though nothing had happened, Elin noticed. Of course she noticed. She'd been noticing her whole life, but she sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, watching the room with an expression that was becoming increasingly guarded. During the dinner service, Rowan tried to keep her engaged, pointing out details of the room, making small observations designed to make her smile. She responded dutifully, but without the enthusiasm she'd shown earlier. The light in her eyes had dimmed. After dinner, guests began mingling, moving between tables, forming clusters of conversation throughout the ballroom. Rowan stood with Elin beside him, uncertain whether to try joining a group or remain where they were. He felt her hand slip into his, and when he looked down, she signed a single word, "Home." Before he could respond, something shifted in the room's energy. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they modulated, voices becoming slightly more conscious of themselves. Rowan followed the subtle turn of heads and saw why. A woman had entered through the main doors. She wore a charcoal grey suit that was clearly bespoke, tailored to perfection. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant style, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from genuine accomplishment rather than inherited privilege. She wasn't the loudest presence in the room, but people noticed her. Several attendees approached her immediately, seeking her attention. Rowan watched her navigate these interactions with practiced grace, warm but efficient, present but not lingering. She was clearly someone important, though he had no idea who she was. The woman's gaze swept across the ballroom, seeming to assess the crowd. Then her eyes stopped. She was looking at Elin. Rowan felt his daughter's hand tighten around his. He glanced down and saw that Elin had noticed the woman's attention. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the crowded room, this elegant stranger and his 9-year-old daughter. Then the woman began walking toward them. She moved through the crowd with purpose, politely excusing herself from conversations, her focus never wavering. Rowan's pulse quickened. He had no idea what to expect. Was something wrong? Had Elin somehow violated some unspoken rule of this place? The woman reached them and did something that stunned Rowan completely. She didn't look at him first. She didn't address him as though he were the gatekeeper to his daughter. Instead, she turned her body fully toward Elin, lowered herself slightly to be at eye level, and raised her hands. Her fingers moved in fluid, practiced gestures. She was signing. "Hello," her hand said. "My name is Maren. What's yours?" Elin's mouth opened in surprise. She looked up at Rowan, then back at the woman, at Maren, as if checking to make sure this was really happening. Tentatively, she raised her own hands. "Elin," she signed. "My name is Elin." Maren's face broke into a genuine smile. "That's a beautiful name. Are you enjoying the party?" And just like that, they were in conversation. Real conversation. Maren asked about Elin's interests, her favorite subjects in school, what she liked to do for fun. Elin responded with growing confidence, her hands moving faster as her excitement built. She told Maren about her art projects, about a book she was reading, about how she'd never been to a place this fancy before. Rowan stood watching, something warm and painful expanding in his chest. He'd seen his daughter communicate with interpreters, with teachers trained in ASL, with the handful of deaf peers she'd met at occasional community events. But this, watching her have a spontaneous, genuine conversation with a complete stranger in an environment where she'd been invisible moments before, this was different. Maren's attention was complete. She wasn't checking her phone, wasn't glancing over Elin's shoulder to see if someone more important wanted her time. She was simply there, present, seeing his daughter as a whole person worthy of engagement. After a few minutes, Maren looked up at Rowan. When she spoke, she also signed simultaneously, including Elin in everything she said. "Your daughter is wonderful," she said. "You must be very proud." "I am," Rowan managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "Thank you for—" He gestured vaguely, unable to quite find the words for what she'd done. Maren seemed to understand. "I learned to sign because of my younger brother. He's deaf. I know what it's like to be in rooms where people don't see you. She pulled a business card from her jacket pocket and handed it to Rowan. "I run an education technology company. We develop programs for students with different learning needs. I'd love to talk more about resources that might be helpful for Elin." Rowan took the card, staring at the elegant printing, Maren Castellano, CEO, Nexus Learning Solutions. A cell phone number was handwritten on the back. "I don't," he started, uncertainty flooding through him. "No pressure," Maren said gently. "But if you'd like to talk, call me or text. Whatever works." She turned back to Elin. "It was wonderful meeting you, Elin. I hope you have a great rest of your evening." Elin signed back enthusiastically. "Thank you." "You too." Maren smiled once more, nodded to Rowan and moved back into the crowd. Within moments she was surrounded by other guests seeking her attention, but she glanced back once and gave Elin a small wave. Elin grabbed Rowan's arm, her hands flying with excitement. "Dad, she could sign!" "She actually talked to me. Did you see? Did you see her?" "I saw, sweetheart." He signed back, his throat tight. For the rest of the evening, Elin's entire demeanor was transformed. She stood taller, smiled more readily, pointed out details of the room to him with renewed energy. When other guests walked past without acknowledging her, it didn't seem to diminish her mood. One person had seen her, really seen her, and that had been enough to change everything. On the subway ride home, Elin fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from the evening's excitement. Rowan pulled out the business card and studied it in the dim light. A CEO, someone who probably had 1,000 demands on her time. Why would she take an interest in them? But as he looked down at his sleeping daughter, at the peaceful expression on her face, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. 3 days passed before Rowan even considered using the phone number on Maren's card. The card itself sat on his dresser, propped against the lamp where he could see it every morning and evening. Each time he looked at it, he felt a war between hope and caution waging inside him. What would he even say? "Thank you for being kind to my daughter. Could you help us?" Both options made him feel small, needy in a way that scraped against his pride. He'd spent 7 years raising Elin alone. 7 years figuring out solutions to problems as they arose. 7 years of making it work through sheer determination and careful budgeting. The idea of reaching out to someone, especially someone wealthy and successful, felt like admitting he couldn't handle things on his own. But Elin wouldn't stop talking about Maren. Every evening at dinner, she'd bring her up. "The lady who signed," she'd call her, her hands moving with an excitement that Rowan rarely saw. "Do you think we'll see her again? Do you think she meant it when she said to call?" On the third evening, while Elin was doing homework at the kitchen table, Kieran called. "So," his friend said without preamble, "did you use that card yet?" "How did you—" "I saw you two talking at the gala. Took me a minute to realize who she was, but then it clicked. Maren Castellano. She's kind of a big deal in education circles. Did a whole profile on her in the business section last year." Rowan felt his stomach tighten. "What did it say?" "Started her company 10 years ago, grew it from nothing to something pretty substantial. She's known for accessibility initiatives, making sure kids with disabilities have the same tech advantages as everyone else. Good reputation from what I could find. No scandals, no shady business practices. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I know you, man. You're overthinking it. She gave you her personal number. That means something." After he hung up, Rowan stared at his phone for another 20 minutes. Finally, he opened a text message and typed carefully, "Hi, Miss Castellano, this is Rowan from the gala. Thank you again for speaking with Elin. She hasn't stopped talking about it." He read it 6 times before hitting send, then immediately regretted the formal tone. Too stiff, too grateful. His phone buzzed. The response came less than 2 minutes later. "Rowan, I'm so glad you reached out. And please, call me Maren. Would you and Elin like to meet for coffee this week? I'd love to talk more." They arranged to meet at a cafe on Saturday morning, a quiet place near the park that Rowan sometimes took Elin to on weekends. He spent the intervening days fighting the urge to cancel, constructing and discarding potential conversation topics, worrying about what this woman, this successful CEO, could possibly want from them. Saturday arrived cold and bright. Aileen insisted on wearing her favorite sweater, the green one, with flowers embroidered on the cuffs. She was vibrating with excitement as they walked to the cafe, her hand in his. Her steps bouncing with energy he wished he could share. Maren was already there when they arrived, seated at a corner table with 3 drinks, 2 hot chocolates and a coffee. She waved when she saw them, her smile warm and immediate. "I hope I guessed right," she said, signing as she spoke. "Hot chocolate for Aileen, coffee for you?" "Perfect," Rowan said. Surprised by the thoughtfulness of the gesture, Aileen climbed into the chair across from Maren and immediately began signing enthusiastically about how excited she'd been for this meeting. Maren engaged with her fully, asking questions, laughing at Aileen's descriptions of her week. After several minutes, Maren reached into the bag beside her chair and pulled out a sleek tablet in a protective case. She slid it across the table to Aileen. "I wanted to give you something," Maren signed. "This has some apps I think you'll like. Stories, art programs, and some games that use sign language." "It's yours to keep." Aileen's eyes went wide. She looked at Rowan, asking silent permission. He felt ambushed by the gift, uncertain how to respond. It was generous, certainly, but also expensive. "Too expensive. That's very kind," Rowan said carefully. "But we can't accept—" "Please," Maren interrupted gently. "I know what you're going to say, but this isn't charity. It's just something I wanted to do." She paused, then added, "My brother didn't have access to resources like this when he was Aileen's age. I wish he had. Let me do this." There was something in her tone that stopped Rowan's protest. Not pity, but understanding. A recognition of struggle that seemed personal rather than abstract. Aileen was already turning the tablet on, her fingers moving across the screen with intuitive ease. Her face glowed with delight as she discovered the apps loaded there. "Thank you," Rowan said quietly, meaning it despite his discomfort. They talked for over an hour. Maren asked about Aileen's school, about the challenges they faced, about what resources they had access to. Rowan found himself being more honest than he'd intended, describing the isolation, the financial strain, the constant worry that he wasn't doing enough. Maren listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Aileen was absorbed in one of the tablet's programs, Maren leaned forward slightly. "There's something I wanted to mention," she said. "My company runs a scholarship program for students with disabilities. It covers summer educational programs, tutoring, sometimes technology or other resources. Aileen might qualify. I don't—" Rowan started, feeling overwhelmed. "Just think about it," Maren said. "No pressure, but I can send you information if you're interested. There's a summer program specifically for deaf students that's really remarkable. 6 weeks of intensive learning with peers who communicate the same way she does." The idea sent a jolt through Rowan. 6 weeks where Aileen wouldn't be the only deaf child in the room. 6 weeks of connection with others who understood her experience. It sounded perfect. It also sounded impossible. "I'd have to take time off work," he said. "And even with a scholarship, the program covers everything," Maren said. "Transportation, meals, materials. That's what the scholarship is for." Rowan looked at his daughter, bent over the tablet with complete focus, her face lit with an expression of pure engagement. When was the last time he'd seen her look like that? "Send me the information," he heard himself say. Maren's smile was genuine. "I will. Today." As they prepared to leave, Aileen carefully packed the tablet in her backpack, treating it like the precious thing it was. She signed to Maren. "Thank you. This is the best present ever." "You're very welcome," Maren signed back. "I hope you enjoy it." On the walk home, Aileen couldn't stop exploring the tablet's features, showing Rowan different apps, exclaiming over illustrations and interactive elements. She was happier than he'd seen her in months. That evening, after Aileen had gone to bed, the tablet placed carefully on her nightstand, Rowan's phone chimed with an email from Maren. True to her word, she'd sent detailed information about the scholarship program, including a link to the summer program application. He read through everything twice. The program was comprehensive, well-structured, designed specifically for deaf children aged 8 to 12. The curriculum focused on academics, but also on building community and confidence. Students would live in dormitories, supervised by trained staff who were fluent in ASL. The application asked for basic information: background, current school situation, family circumstances. There was a section for parents to describe why the program would benefit their child. Rowan stared at that blank space for a long time. Why would this benefit Aylin? Where would he even begin? Because she spent every recess standing alone. Because she came home from school and sighed with relief, grateful to be in a space where she didn't have to work so hard to be understood. Because she was brilliant and funny and kind, and the world kept missing it. He started typing, and once he began, the words poured out. He wrote about her isolation, her resilience, her hunger for connection with peers who shared her language. He wrote about his limitations as a hearing parent, about how hard he tried and how it never quite felt like enough. He wrote about watching her face transform when Maren had signed to her, how that single moment had shown him what his daughter could be when she wasn't constantly translating herself for others. By the time he finished, it was past midnight. His back ached from hunching over the laptop, and his eyes burned with fatigue. But the application was complete. He saved it without submitting, telling himself he'd review it again in the morning with fresh eyes. But as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he knew he was going to submit it. He knew because Aylin deserved this chance. Whatever pride he had to swallow, whatever vulnerability he had to accept, it was worth it for her. The next morning, before he could second-guess himself, he submitted the application. The acceptance letter arrived 2 weeks later on a Tuesday afternoon. Rowan was still at work when the mail was delivered, so he didn't see it until he picked Aylin up from school, and they returned home together. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with the Nexus Learning Solutions logo embossed in the corner. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. Aylin stood beside him, watching his face for clues about what the letter said. He read it once, quickly, barely processing the words. Then he read it again, slower, making sure he understood correctly. Aylin had been accepted. Full scholarship. The summer program began in 6 weeks and ran for 6 intensive weeks after that. Transportation to and from the facility would be provided. All meals, materials, and activities were included. There was a number to call to confirm attendance and discuss logistics. Rowan looked down at his daughter. "You got in," he signed, his movements slow with the weight of emotion. Her face transformed, confusion shifting to comprehension, then exploding into joy. She actually jumped in the air, and started signing so rapidly he could barely keep up. Really? I get to go? When? How long? What do I need to bring? Can I tell my teacher?" He pulled her into a hug, feeling her heart racing against his chest, her small body vibrating with excitement. Over the top of her head, he read the letter again. 6 weeks. She'd be gone for 6 weeks, living in dormitories with other deaf students, learning and growing in ways he couldn't provide. The thought filled him with pride and a hollow ache he didn't want to examine too closely. That evening, he called his supervisor to request the time off. The conversation did not go well. 6 weeks? His supervisor's voice carried clear irritation. "That's a month and a half, Rowan. We're already short-staffed. It's for my daughter. It's an educational program, and that's great for her, but I've got a building to maintain. I can give you 1 week, maybe 2, but 6. That's asking a lot." "It would be unpaid leave," Rowan said, hating the pleading note that crept into his voice. "I'm not asking for vacation time. Just unpaid or not, I need reliable staff. If you're gone that long, I'll have to bring someone else in temporarily. And there's no guarantee your position will still be here when you get back." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Rowan closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of impossible choices settling over his shoulders. The job paid their bills, kept them housed and fed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Losing it would be catastrophic. But the thought of telling Aylin she couldn't go to the program, of watching that light dim from her eyes, that felt equally impossible. "I understand," Rowan said carefully. "Can I think about it?" You've got until the end of the week to let me know. After hanging up, Rowan sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Aileen was in her room, probably looking at the program information for the 100th time. He could hear her humming, the tuneless sound she made when she was happy, a vibration she felt more than heard. His phone rang. Marin's name appeared on the screen. "I heard the good news," she said when he answered, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. "Congratulations." Aileen must be thrilled. "She is," Rowan confirmed. Then before he could stop himself, he added, "I might not be able to let her go." Silence on the other end, then, "What's wrong?" He explained the situation with work, the unspoken ultimatum, the impossibility of going 6 weeks without income. The words came out faster than he intended, tinged with frustration and fear. Marin listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Then, would you and Aileen like to come to dinner at my place? Tomorrow evening?" The invitation surprised him. "I don't think, please," she said. "I'd like you to meet someone, and we can talk about this, figure out options. You don't have to make any decisions right now. Just come to dinner." Something in her tone, not pity, but something else, something that sounded like genuine care, made him agree. Marin's apartment was in a neighborhood Rowan rarely visited, where old brownstones had been renovated into expensive condos. Her unit was on the 4th floor, spacious and filled with light from tall windows. The furniture was elegant but comfortable, and the walls held art that looked original rather than mass-produced. But what struck Rowan most was how lived-in the space felt. Books stacked on end tables, a sweater draped over the back of a chair, plants in various stages of health clustered on the windowsills. It was the home of someone who actually lived there, not just a showpiece. Marin greeted them at the door, already signing as she spoke. "Come in, please. My brother should be here any minute." She'd cooked herself, pasta with a sauce that filled the apartment with the smell of garlic and herbs, salad, fresh bread. They sat at her dining table, and Rowan felt some of his tension ease in the warmth of the space. The doorbell rang, and Marin went to answer it. She returned with a man in his late 20s, tall with dark hair and an easy smile. He immediately began signing to Aileen. "Hi, I'm Theo. You must be Aileen." Aileen's shyness lasted about 30 seconds before she was in animated conversation with him. Theo was Marin's brother, the one she'd mentioned at the gala. He was deaf, worked as a graphic designer, and had the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was. Watching Aileen talk with him. Really talk. Freely and without having to simplify her thoughts or slow down her signing, something shifted in Rowan's chest. This is what she could have. Not just at the summer program, but in life. Connection with people who spoke her language fluently, who understood her experience from the inside. During dinner, Theo told stories about his own childhood, about struggling in mainstream schools where he was the only deaf student, about how different his life had become once he'd connected with the deaf community. He was funny, self-deprecating, and clearly successful. He was also everything Rowan wanted Aileen to become: confident, connected, and comfortable in his own skin. After they ate, Aileen and Theo moved to the living room, where he showed her some of his design work on a tablet. Their hands flew in conversation, both of them occasionally laughing at private jokes. Marin refilled Rowan's wineglass and sat across from him. Theo was 18 before he really connected with other deaf people. He'd spent his entire childhood isolated, trying to fit into a hearing world that didn't quite make space for him. She paused. "I watched it happen. I watched him struggle, and I didn't fully understand how lonely he was until later." "You learned sign language for him," Rowan said. "I did, but it took me too long. I was already in college when I became fluent. By then, he'd internalized years of feeling like he didn't quite belong anywhere." She looked toward the living room, where her brother and Aileen were still deep in conversation. "I don't want that for Aileen. She has a chance to build community now, while she's young. That program could change her life." "I know," Rowan said quietly. "But if I lose my job, what if you didn't have to worry about that?" He looked at her sharply. "I'm not taking money from you. I'm not offering money," Marin said patiently. "I'm offering a job. You remember I mentioned my company is renovating our offices?" He nodded warily. "We need an accessibility consultant." Someone who understands how deaf people and people with other disabilities navigate spaces. Someone who can look at our designs and tell us what we're missing. She leaned forward. You have an architecture background. You've spent years advocating for Elin, understanding what accommodations she needs. That's exactly the perspective we need. I didn't finish my degree. I don't care about the degree. I care about the knowledge and the lived experience. You know things our architects don't know because you've lived them. She pulled a folder from a nearby shelf and slid it across the table. This is the project scope and the compensation we're offering. Look it over. Think about it. But Rowan, you're qualified for this. And it would be enough to cover your bills while Elin is at the program. He opened the folder with trembling hands. The numbers on the contract made his breath catch. It was more than his current job paid for 3 months of work, for 6 weeks of consulting. This is too much, he said. It's market rate for consulting work. I checked. Marin's expression was serious. I need this project done. You need flexibility for Elin's program. This solves both problems. It's not charity, it's not a handout. It's work that needs doing, and you're the right person to do it. Rowan stared at the papers, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to refuse on principle, to insist he could handle things his own way. But he looked at Elin in the other room, signing animatedly with Theo, her face alight with the kind of joy that came from being fully understood. He thought about the program, about the community she could build, about the person she could become. He thought about his old sketchbooks, gathering dust in the closet, about the dreams he'd set aside, about whether maybe, just maybe, it was possible to want something for himself while still being a good father. I'll do it, he said before he could change his mind. I'll do the consulting work. Marin smiled. Good. We start next week. I'll send you all the project files and schedule a meeting with the design team. Later, as they prepared to leave, Theo pulled Rowan aside. He signed clearly, making sure Rowan understood. That program changed my life. I went to one like it when I was 16. It was the first time I realized I wasn't broken. I was just deaf. There's a difference. Rowan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Your daughter is amazing, Theo continued. But she needs to know she's not alone. She needs to see adults like me, kids like her. She needs to know what's possible. On the subway ride home, Elin fell asleep against his shoulder again, exhausted from the evening's excitement. Rowan held the folder with the consulting contract, running his thumb along its edge. He'd spent 7 years building walls around their life, keeping them safe through isolation and self-sufficiency. Now those walls were coming down, and it was terrifying. But as he looked at his sleeping daughter, he realized that maybe the walls had been keeping them safe from the wrong things. They'd protected them from disappointment, from dependence, from vulnerability. But they'd also kept out possibility, community, and help. Maybe it was time to risk something different. The next morning, he called his supervisor and gave his notice. Then he confirmed Elin's spot in the summer program. And finally, he signed the consulting contract and sent it back to Marin. For better or worse, their lives were changing. The first day of the summer program arrived with the kind of bright morning that felt designed for new beginnings. Rowan helped Elin pack her suitcase the night before, clothes organized by outfit, her favorite books, the tablet Marin had given her, and a framed photo of the two of them that she insisted on bringing. I'll be back in 6 weeks, she signed to him as they double-checked her bags. That's not so long. Not long at all, he agreed, trying to believe it. The program facility was an hour outside the city, a renovated school building set on spacious grounds with trees and open fields. When they arrived, the parking lot was full of families, parents and children signing to each other, the silence of their conversations creating an atmosphere that felt both foreign and strangely peaceful to Rowan. Elin's excitement was palpable. She spotted other children her age and immediately seemed to stand taller, her eyes bright with anticipation. A counselor approached them, a young woman who signed her introduction and helped Elin check in. As they toured the dormitory and met Elin's roommates, Rowan felt himself becoming surplus to requirements. His daughter was already making connections, already finding her place. When it was time for him to leave, she hugged him tightly but briefly, eager to return to the new friends she'd just met. "Love you, Dad," she signed. "Love you too, sweetheart." The drive back to the city felt longer than the drive there. The apartment, when he entered it, was too quiet. He stood in Eileen's doorway, looking at her neatly made bed, her stuffed animals arranged on the shelf, and felt the weight of her absence settle over him. For 7 years, every decision had been about her. Every choice filtered through the question of what was best for Eileen. Now, for 6 weeks, he had to figure out what to do with himself. The consulting work started 2 days later. Rowan arrived at Nexus Learning Solutions headquarters, feeling like an imposter in his dress clothes. The building was modern, all glass and clean lines, filled with people who looked purposeful and confident. Maren met him in the lobby, professional but warm. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." She led him to a conference room where 3 architects and 2 project managers waited. They looked at him with polite curiosity, some skepticism visible in their expressions. He was the outsider, the person without formal credentials, brought in because he knew the CEO. But then Maren pulled up the renovation plans on a large screen, and Rowan forgot to be nervous. He studied the designs for the new learning spaces, the classrooms, the common areas, the technology centers, and he saw immediately what was missing. "The doorways," he said, pointing to the blueprints. "They're standard width, but if you're going to have students who use wheelchairs or other mobility devices, you need wider clearance. And here," he indicated a classroom layout, "the teacher's desk is positioned so that a deaf student would have to choose between seeing the teacher or seeing the interpreter. You need sightlines that allow for both." The architects leaned forward, paying attention now. He continued, identifying issues they hadn't considered. The lighting that would create glare for students trying to read lips or watch sign language, the acoustics that would make it harder for students with hearing aids, the placement of visual alert systems. As he spoke, he felt something awakening in him, a part of his brain he'd shut down years ago. The spatial thinking, the problem-solving, the ability to imagine how people would actually move through and use these spaces. It had been dormant, but it wasn't dead. By the end of the meeting, the skepticism had vanished from the architects' faces. They asked questions, took notes, requested his input on specific design elements. One of them, a woman named Vera, said, "This is exactly what we needed. We've been designing these spaces like we design everything else, and that's the problem." Over the following weeks, Rowan threw himself into the work. He visited the existing facilities, interviewed students and teachers, sketched modifications to the proposed designs. The team began incorporating his suggestions, and he watched as the plans transformed into something genuinely accessible, not as an afterthought, but as a core principle. His co-workers began seeking him out for input beyond the renovation project. Questions about accessibility, features in software design, about how to make training materials more inclusive, about best practices for working with deaf employees. He found himself becoming not just a consultant, but an advocate and educator. The work fed something in him he hadn't realized was starving. He was using his mind in ways his maintenance job had never allowed. People respected his expertise, valued his perspective. He received his first paycheck and stared at the number, hardly believing it was real. Every few days, he received updates from the program about Eileen. Photos of her laughing with other students, participating in activities, looking confident and connected. In their video calls, with an interpreter facilitating, she told him about her new friends, about the things she was learning, about how different it felt to be in a place where everyone signed. "I don't have to explain myself here," she signed. "Everyone just understands." He was happy for her. He was also, though he hated to admit it, a little lost without her. One evening, Maren invited him to dinner again, this time just the two of them. They met at a quiet restaurant, sat across from each other and talked about the project, about Elin's progress, about everything and nothing. "You've been impressive," Maren said at one point. "The team loves working with you. They've learned more in these few weeks than they would have from a dozen textbooks. I'm just sharing what I know from experience. That's exactly what makes it valuable." She paused, then added, "Have you thought about what happens after this project ends? Back to job hunting, I suppose. Or," Maren said carefully, "you could stay. We could create a permanent position, Director of Accessibility Design. It would involve consulting on all our projects, training our teams, making sure everything we build truly serves all students." Rowan set down his fork, stunned. "I'm not qualified for something like that. You're the most qualified person I know. You've lived it, studied it, and now you're designing it. That's the exact combination we need." Later, walking through the city after dinner, they fell into step beside each other. The evening was warm, the streets busy with people enjoying the weather. Maren told him about her brother's childhood, about watching him struggle, about the guilt she still carried for not understanding sooner how isolated he'd been. "That's why I started the company," she said. "I wanted to build the kind of educational environment Theo needed, but never had. Every student we help, it feels like, I don't know, making amends." "You can't save your brother retroactively," Rowan said gently. "I know, but I can help other kids avoid what he went through." She glanced at him. "What you're helping us build, it matters, more than you probably realize." They reached her building, and she turned to face him. "Think about the job offer. Take your time, but I hope you'll say yes." That night, back in his too-quiet apartment, Rowan pulled his old sketchbooks from the closet. He flipped through pages of designs he'd created in college, buildings that would never be built, dreams that had seemed impossible. But now, looking at them with fresh eyes, he saw something different. Not lost possibilities, but dormant skills. Not abandoned dreams, but deferred ones. He picked up a pencil and started sketching. Modifications to the Learning Center designs, ideas for future projects. The lines flowed easily, naturally, like muscle memory returning. He worked late into the night, lost in the creative process, feeling more like himself than he had in years. When he finally stopped, he looked at what he'd created and felt something settle in his chest. Hope, yes, but also something else. Purpose, the sense that maybe finally he was becoming the person he was meant to be. Not just Elin's father, though that would always be his most important role, but also Rowan, designer, advocate, professional, a whole person with his own dreams and capabilities. His daughter was growing, changing, becoming more independent. Maybe it was time for him to do the same. The summer program ended on a Saturday. Rowan arrived early, watching from the parking lot as families reunited with their children. When Elin emerged from the building, he almost didn't recognize her. Not physically. She looked the same, maybe a bit taller, but in the way she carried herself. Her shoulders were back, her head high, and she walked with a confidence that made his throat tight. She saw him and ran, throwing herself into his arms with the enthusiasm he remembered. But when she pulled back and started signing, he noticed the difference immediately. Her signs were faster, more fluid, incorporating expressions and nuances he'd never seen her use before. "Dad, I have so much to tell you. I made friends, real friends, and we're going to keep in touch. And there's this girl named Iris who wants to be an artist like me. And we learned about deaf history and famous deaf people. And I didn't know any of that before," and he laughed, trying to keep up with her rapid-fire signing. "Slow down, sweetheart. We have time?" On the drive home, she told him everything. About her teachers, her roommates, the projects they'd completed, the field trips they'd taken. But more than the activities, she talked about the feeling of being understood, of not having to explain herself, of being part of a community where she wasn't different. "Can I go to a school like that?" she asked suddenly. "Not just for summer, but all the time." The question hit him hard. He'd known it was coming. The program director had mentioned it in her final email, had included information about specialized schools for deaf students. Full-time enrollment, year-round community, comprehensive deaf education, we can talk about it. He signed carefully. It's a big decision. That evening, after Elin had unpacked and was absorbed in her tablet, Rowan sat with the information about the specialized schools. The academics were strong, the support comprehensive, and the community aspect invaluable. But it would mean changing everything, their routine, their neighborhood, possibly even where they lived to be closer to the school. It would mean his daughter needed him less. The thought was bittersweet. He'd spent years trying to give her independence, trying to prepare her for a world that wouldn't always accommodate her. Now she was reaching for that independence, and he wasn't sure he was ready to let go. His phone rang. "Maren, welcome back," she said warmly. "How's Elin?" "Transformed," he admitted. I don't even know how to describe it. She's more herself than I've ever seen her. That's wonderful. Listen, I know you just got her back, but I wanted to check in about the job offer. Have you had time to think about it?" He had. He'd thought about little else during Aylin's final week at the program. "I want to accept," he said. "But I need to know, can I be honest about something?" "Of course, I'm terrified. This kind of work, this kind of position, it's what I dreamed about when I was 22. But I'm 49 now. I gave up that dream a long time ago. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't—" "Rowan," Maren interrupted gently. "You're already doing the work. You've been doing it brilliantly for 6 weeks. This is just making it official, but the team, they're all younger, more formally educated." She paused. "You have something they don't. You have perspective they can't learn from a textbook. You've lived the experience of advocating for accessibility every single day. That's irreplaceable." After they hung up, Rowan found Elin sitting cross-legged on her bed, looking at photos from the program on her tablet. He sat beside her. "Can we talk about something?" He signed. She looked up, immediately attentive. He told her about the job offer, about what it would mean, stability, better income, work that mattered. He told her about the specialized school option, about how it could give her what the summer program had given her, but year-round. "But it's far," he signed. "You'd have to take a different bus, and I wouldn't be able to pick you up after school like I do now. We might have to move to be closer." Elin was quiet for a long moment, processing. "Then, do you want to take the job?" "I want you to have what's best for you. That's not what I asked." Her expression was serious, more adult than child. "Do you want to take the job?" He thought about the past 6 weeks, about rediscovering parts of himself he'd thought were gone forever, about the satisfaction of solving complex problems, of teaching others, of creating spaces that would help thousands of students, about feeling like a whole person again. "Yes," he signed honestly. "I do," she smiled. "Then take it. And I want to go to the specialized school. We both get to have what we want. When did you get so wise?" he asked. "I learned it from you," she signed simply. 2 weeks later, Rowan's first official day as Director of Accessibility Design arrived. He had business cards now, an office with his name on the door, a team that reported to him. The imposter syndrome was fierce, but so was his determination. Maren had been right. The work was an extension of what he'd already been doing, just formalized and expanded. He consulted on new projects, trained staff, reviewed all company materials for accessibility compliance. His perspective shaped decisions at every level of the organization. The other employees started coming to him, not just with technical questions, but with personal ones. A woman whose nephew had autism, a man considering adopting a deaf child. They wanted to understand, to do better, and he helped them see that accessibility wasn't about special accommodation. It was about good design that served everyone. Meanwhile, Elin started at the specialized school. The transition was smoother than Rowan had feared. She came home each day buzzing with excitement, telling him about her classes, her friends, the teachers who understood her without effort. He saw her growing, changing, becoming more independent each day. She needed his help, less with homework, because her teachers communicated in her language. She needed his advocacy less at school because the entire system was designed for her success. She still needed him, would always need him as her father, but the nature of that need was shifting. One evening, about a month into their new routines, Maren invited him to dinner again. They'd been spending more time together outside of work. Casual meals, weekend coffee, comfortable conversations that ranged from professional topics to personal stories. Over dinner, she told him more about her divorce, about how she'd thrown herself into work afterward, about how she'd built walls around her personal life that were only now starting to come down. "I wasn't looking for anything when I met you," she admitted. "I'd convinced myself I was fine alone, that work was enough. And now?" Rowan asked, his heart beating faster. "Now I'm not so sure." She looked at him directly. "I care about you. Not just as an employee, not just as Eileen's father. As you." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Rowan thought about all the reasons he should be cautious. Their professional relationship, the complexity of bringing someone new into Eileen's life, his own history of being left behind. But he also thought about the past months, about how Maren had seen both him and Eileen when others hadn't, about how she'd offered opportunities without making them feel like charity, about how natural it felt to be around her. "I care about you too," he said finally. "I have for a while. I just wasn't sure if I was real." She smiled sadly. "I understand. People have let you down before, not just me. Eileen too, I know. And I would never—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll show up. I can promise I see you both, and I'm not going anywhere." They left the restaurant and walked through the city, their hands eventually finding each other. It felt natural, right, like a piece clicking into place. When they reached his building, Rowan invited her up. Eileen was staying overnight at a friend's house. Another first. Another sign of her growing independence and expanding social circle. They talked until late, curled up on his couch, sharing stories in comfortable silences. When Maren finally left, Rowan stood at the window and watched her cab disappear down the street. His phone buzzed with a text from her. "Thank you for tonight. For trusting me," he typed back. "Thank you for being trustworthy." As he got ready for bed, he thought about how much had changed in just a few months. He had work that fulfilled him. Eileen was thriving. And now, tentatively, hopefully, he had something growing with Maren that felt real and solid. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was actually living, and it felt like coming home to himself. 2 months after Eileen started at the specialized school, life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. Rowan's work at Nexus Learning Solutions had expanded beyond the initial renovation project. He was now leading accessibility initiatives across all the company's programs, speaking at education conferences and being consulted on policy decisions. His relationship with Maren had deepened naturally, built on shared values and genuine affection. They were careful around Eileen, taking things slowly, but his daughter had already noticed the change and seemed quietly pleased about it. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted. Rowan had just gotten home from work, was loosening his tie and checking the mail, when he found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and several printed documents. The letter was typed, anonymous. "You should know the truth about your benefactor." His stomach clenched as he read on. The letter detailed how Nexus Learning Solutions received substantial tax benefits for their scholarship programs, how the company's public relations team had used stories of scholarship recipients, including Eileen, in marketing materials and social media campaigns, how the disability initiatives improved the company's standing with investors and opened doors to government contracts worth millions. The attached documents seemed to prove it all. Screenshots of social media posts featuring photos from the gala, quotes about the company's commitment to accessibility, financial reports showing tax deductions, a memo about leveraging human interest stories for brand building. There, in one of the screenshots, was a photo he recognized, Eileen at the summer program, laughing with other students. The caption read, making dreams possible for students like Elin. Rowan's hands trembled as he read through everything twice. His mind raced backward through the past months, reinterpreting every interaction through this new lens. Had Maren approached them at the gala by chance, or had it been calculated? The scholarship, the tablet, the job offer, were they genuine kindness or strategic investments that would pay dividends in tax breaks and positive publicity? He thought about his wife leaving, about how she'd made him feel like he and Elin were too much work, too much burden. He thought about all the people over the years who'd offered help that came with strings attached, who'd used Elin's story to make themselves feel good. The patterns of his past overlaid themselves on his present, and suddenly everything looked different, contaminated. His phone buzzed. A text from Maren. "Dinner tomorrow, my place. I'm making that pasta you liked." He stared at the message, feeling something cold and hard forming in his chest. How had he been so stupid? How had he let himself believe that someone like her would be interested in someone like him for any reason other than what he could provide? A compelling story, a face for her charitable initiatives, a proof of her company's good works. He didn't respond to the text. That night, he barely slept. He pulled up his laptop and searched for information about Nexus Learning Solutions' finances. Everything in the anonymous letter checked out. The company did receive tax benefits for their scholarship programs. Their marketing materials did feature stories of students they'd helped. It was all technically true, but what did that mean? Was Maren simply a good businesswoman who'd found a way to make helping people profitable? Or had she targeted him and Elin from the beginning, seeing them as useful tools for building her company's reputation? By morning, he'd convinced himself it was the latter. The evidence was all there. He'd just been too grateful, too hopeful, too willing to believe that good things could happen to people like him without a catch. Elin noticed his mood over breakfast. "What's wrong?" She signed. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just tired," but she knew him too well. "You're upset about something," he couldn't tell her. Couldn't shatter her happiness. Couldn't take away the school she loved, the friends she'd made, the confidence she'd built. Whatever happened between him and Maren, Elin's life had genuinely improved. That much at least seemed real. At work, he avoided Maren as much as possible. He cancelled their lunch meeting, claiming a deadline. He kept his office door closed and buried himself in project work. His team noticed the change but didn't comment. Maren texted him 3 more times throughout the day. He responded with single-word answers, professional and distant. By evening, when he still hadn't given her a real response, she called. He let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. And again. Finally she texted, "Rowan, what's going on? You're scaring me. Please talk to me." He stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Did you know your marketing team was using Elin's story in company materials?" The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared and disappeared several times before her response came. "What? No, what are you talking about?" He took a photo of the documents and sent them to her without comment. 5 minutes later, his doorbell rang. He looked through the peephole and saw Maren standing in the hallway, still in her work clothes, her expression stricken. He opened the door but didn't invite her in. "How long have you known?" "I didn't know. Not about this." She held up her phone, showing the screenshots he'd sent. I didn't authorize this." "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter? They're real, aren't they? Your company benefits from helping us. Tax breaks, good publicity, government contracts. It's all very convenient." "Yes, the company benefits," Maren said, her voice shaking slightly. "That's how I designed the programs, to be sustainable, to make business sense so they'd continue long term. But that doesn't mean, Rowan, you can't think I helped you and Elin just for—" "Why did you approach her that night?" "At the gala. Was it really chance?" Maren's face went pale. "Of course it was chance. I saw her standing there being ignored, and I remembered Theo at that age, and I—" She stopped, taking a breath. "Who sent you this? Who's trying to make you doubt? It doesn't matter who sent it. What matters is whether it's true." "The facts are true," Maren said carefully. "But the interpretation, the implication that I've been using you, that's not true. That's never been true. How do I know that? The question came out rawer than he intended. How do I know what's real? You don't, Maren said quietly. That's what trust means. You have to decide whether you believe me or not. I can't prove my intentions, Rowan. I can only tell you that everything I've felt, everything that's happened between us, it's been real. More real than anything I've felt in years. He wanted to believe her. The wanting was almost painful in its intensity. But belief required trust, and trust required vulnerability, and he'd been hurt too many times before. I need time to think, he said. How much time? I don't know. Maren nodded slowly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Okay, but Rowan, please, don't let whoever sent this poison what we've built. Don't let them win. After she left, he closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. Eileen's presentation at school was tomorrow, a showcase where students would share projects about their personal journeys. Maren had confirmed weeks ago that she'd attend. He'd been looking forward to it, to having both of them there, to feeling like maybe finally they were becoming something like a family. Now he didn't know what to think, what to feel, what to believe. The anonymous letter sat on his kitchen counter, and he picked it up again, studying it for any clue about who'd sent it. Someone who wanted to hurt Maren? Someone who wanted to hurt him? Someone who simply wanted to expose what they saw as hypocrisy? Or someone who was telling him a truth he needed to hear, even if it broke his heart? He had until tomorrow to decide. Rowan didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, the anonymous letter in front of him, his mind circling the same questions over and over. By 3 a.m, he'd done what he always did when he couldn't think clearly. He called Kieran. His friend answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep. This better be important. I need your help with something. 20 minutes later, Kieran arrived at his apartment with coffee and the kind of steady presence that had gotten Rowan through more than one crisis. He listened as Rowan explained everything. The letter, the documents, the confrontation with Maren. When Rowan finished, Kieran was quiet for a long moment. Then, you remember when your supervisor was so angry about you leaving? About you taking this new job? What does that have to... He was bitter, man. Really bitter. Talked about it constantly after you left. About how you'd gotten some cushy job through connections while the rest of us were stuck doing real work. Kieran pulled out his phone and scrolled through some messages. Look at this. He showed Rowan a text chain with another former co-worker. The conversation was from 2 weeks ago, discussing how the supervisor had been asking questions about Rowan's new job, about the company, about how he'd gotten hired. You think he sent the letter? Rowan asked. I think he's petty enough to try to sabotage your happiness, yeah. Kieran set his phone down. But here's the real question. Does it matter who sent it if the facts are accurate? That's what I can't figure out. Okay, so let's think about this logically. Yes, Maren's company benefits from helping people like Ellen, but that doesn't automatically mean she's been using you. It could just mean she built a business model that makes helping people sustainable. Kieran leaned forward. I've watched you these past months. You're happier than I've ever seen you. Eileen is thriving. You have work that matters to you. Are you really going to throw that away because someone, probably someone who wants to hurt you, sent an anonymous letter? But what if it's true? What if she's been... Then ask her. Really ask her. Not when you're angry and defensive, but when you're calm enough to actually hear the answer. Kieran stood up. You've got that school thing today, right? Eileen's presentation. Rowan nodded. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go, you're going to watch your daughter shine, and then you're going to talk to Maren like an adult. Not accusing, not assuming. Just honest conversation. He paused at the door. And Rowan, consider the possibility that you're looking for reasons to sabotage this because you're scared of being happy. Because being happy means you could get hurt again. After Kieran left, those words echoed in Rowan's mind. Was that what he was doing? Using the letter as an excuse to retreat behind his walls before someone else could leave him. His phone buzzed. A text from Maren. I know you asked for time, but I want you to know I talked to my marketing director last night. She admitted using photos from public events without consulting me first. I've had all content featuring Eileen removed and fired her this morning. I'm also implementing new protocols to ensure this never happens again. I'm sorry I didn't catch it sooner. You and Elin deserved better." Rowan stared at the message. She'd fired someone, taken immediate action, changed company policies. That wasn't the behavior of someone who'd been deliberately exploiting them. Another text came through. "I also want you to see something. Can I drop by before the presentation? It won't take long." He hesitated, then typed, "Okay." 30 minutes later, she arrived carrying a leather-bound journal. Her eyes were red-rimmed, evidence she'd slept as poorly as he had. "This is private," she said, handing it to him. "I've never shown it to anyone except my therapist. But I need you to understand." He opened it carefully. The pages were dated, written in neat handwriting that occasionally broke into hurried scrawls. The first entry was from the night of the gala. "Met the most remarkable little girl tonight. She reminded me so much of Theo at that age. That same mix of hope and resignation, of wanting connection but expecting to be overlooked. Her father was trying so hard to protect her, to include her. It broke my heart and inspired me at the same time. I don't know if I'll ever see them again, but I hope they're okay." Rowan's throat tightened. He flipped through more pages, finding entries that chronicled their growing friendship, her developing feelings, her fears about mixing business and personal relationships. One entry from a month ago read, "I'm falling for him, not because of what he represents for the company, not because his story is compelling, but because he's genuine and kind and sees me, really sees me, not just as a CEO or a success story, but as a person. I'm terrified he'll think this is about business. Terrified he'll never trust that my feelings are real." Another entry, more recent. "Elin called me Aunt Maren today. I cried in my car afterward. I never thought I'd want a family again after the divorce. But with them, I can imagine it. I can imagine holidays and homework help and inside jokes. I can imagine building something real. Is it too much to hope for?" Rowan closed the journal, his hands shaking. These were private thoughts, never meant for public consumption. They were raw and honest and unmistakably genuine. "The company does benefit from the scholarship programs," Maren said quietly. "I won't lie about that. When I designed them, I made sure they'd be sustainable and profitable, because that's the only way to ensure they'd continue. But you and Elin, that was never part of some business strategy. That was me seeing a child who needed help and a father who reminded me why I started this company in the first place." "I'm sorry," Rowan said, his voice rough. I should have talked to you instead of assuming the worst. You've been hurt before." "You had reasons to be cautious," she paused. "But Rowan, I need you to decide if you can trust me. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. Because I can't keep proving myself over and over. At some point, you have to choose to believe me or not." He thought about the past months, about every interaction they'd had, about how she'd never pushed, never demanded, never made him feel small, about how she'd seen both him and Elin as whole people, worthy of respect and opportunity, about how natural it felt to be with her, how right. "I believe you," he said. "I'm sorry I doubted you. Who sent the letter?" "I think it was my old supervisor." "Kieran figured it out," Maren nodded slowly. "Makes sense. Hurt people often try to hurt others." She looked at him directly. "Are we okay?" "We're okay. More than okay." He reached for her hand. "I'm sorry I made you fire someone because of my paranoia. I didn't fire her because of your paranoia. I fired her because she violated company policy and used a child's image without proper consent. That's on her, not you." They sat together in silence for a moment, hands linked, the journal between them. Finally, Maren said, "We should get going. Don't want to be late for Elin's presentation." "Wait." Rowan pulled her closer. "Thank you for being patient with me, for understanding why I was scared. Thank you for choosing to trust me anyway." As they drove to the school together, Rowan felt something settle in his chest. Not the absence of fear. He'd probably always have some of that, given his history. But the decision to trust despite the fear, that was new. That was growth. Elin's presentation was about to begin, and for the first time in a long time, Rowan felt ready to step fully into this new life he'd been building. Not cautiously, not with one foot out the door, but completely, Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The school auditorium was filled with families by the time they arrived. Parents and siblings crowded into rows of seats, conversations happening in both sign language and spoken words, creating a unique atmosphere of inclusive communication. Rowan and Maren found seats near the middle, the tension from the previous night still present, but softer now, manageable. Other students presented first. A boy talked about learning to advocate for himself with his cochlear implant. A girl shared her journey of discovering deaf culture and ASL after years in mainstream schools. Each presentation was moving in its own way, revealing struggles overcome and identities claimed. Then it was Aylin's turn. She walked onto the stage with a confidence that still surprised Rowan, even after months of watching her grow. She wore her favorite blue dress and carried a remote control for the presentation screen behind her. An interpreter stood to the side for hearing family members, but Aylin's presentation was primarily in ASL, her hands moving with practiced fluidity. The first slide appeared, a photo of Aylin from 2 years ago, sitting alone on a playground bench while other children played in the background. Even from a distance, the isolation in that image was heartbreaking. Aylin signed to the audience. This was me before. Always watching, never part of things. People didn't ignore me on purpose. They just didn't know how to see me. More slides followed, each one telling a story. Aylin at various ages, always slightly apart from groups, always observing from the edges. Then came the photo from the gala, the one Rowan remembered Kieran taking, of Aylin standing beside him. Her expression polite but distant, surrounded by adults who looked past her. This night, I thought would be like all the others, Aylin signed. Another place where I was invisible. The next slide made Rowan's breath catch. It was a photo he didn't remember being taken. Maren kneeling slightly, to be at Aylin's eye level, both of them signing, both of them smiling. Someone must have captured it during their conversation. Then someone saw me, Aylin continued. Really saw me. She didn't talk to my dad about me. She talked to me, in my language, like I was a real person who mattered. Rowan felt tears building behind his eyes. Beside him, Maren had gone very still. The presentation continued with photos from the summer program. Aylin laughing with friends, participating in activities, standing confidently in front of groups. The transformation was visible in every image. I learned I wasn't alone, Aylin signed. I learned there were other kids like me. Other adults who grew up deaf and had amazing lives. I learned that being deaf wasn't something wrong with me. It was just part of who I am. New slides appeared, showing Aylin at her new school, surrounded by signing peers, engaged and animated. Then came photos of her with Rowan, current ones, where both of them looked happier, more relaxed, more connected than in the earlier images. My dad learned too, Aylin signed. He learned he didn't have to carry everything alone. He learned he could have dreams again. The final slide was a photo that made Rowan's throat tighten. It showed the three of them, Rowan, Aylin and Maren, at a restaurant booth, heads close together, all of them smiling. Theo must have taken it during one of their dinners. Aylin's hands moved slowly now, deliberate and emphatic. When one person really sees you, everything changes. You start to believe you matter. You start to see yourself differently. And then other people start to see you too. She paused, looking directly at where Rowan and Maren sat. My dad taught me to be brave, and Maren taught me I didn't have to be invisible. Together, they taught me that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who chooses to see you and who you choose to see back. The final slide appeared, simple text that read, "Thank you for seeing me." The audience erupted in applause, hands waving in the air in the ASL sign for clapping. Aylin stood on stage, absorbing it all, her face radiant. Rowan couldn't see clearly through his tears. Beside him, Maren was crying too, not bothering to hide it. "She called us family," Maren whispered. "She did," Rowan managed. As Aylin came off the stage, she didn't run to Rowan first. She went to both of them, wrapping her arms around Maren's waist, then reaching for Rowan's hand. The three of them stood there together, while other families moved around them, a small island of connection in the crowded space. Elin pulled back and signed rapidly. "Did you like it?" "I worked really hard on it. It was perfect," Rowan signed back. "You were perfect." Maren knelt down to Elin's level, signing, "Thank you for including me. For seeing me, too." Elin reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to Maren. It was a hand-drawn card, carefully colored, showing stick figures of 3 people. Their hands were raised in signs, and above them were the words, "My family." Maren opened the card, read the simple message inside, "Thank you for making us whole," and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She pulled Elin into a tight hug, then reached out to include Rowan. For a long moment, they stayed like that. 3 people who'd found each other by chance and chosen each other by design, holding on to something fragile and precious and real. The presentation ended to thunderous applause. But for Rowan, everything else faded into background noise. He stood with Maren and Elin in the middle of the crowded auditorium, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt like he wasn't fighting the world alone. Elin tugged on his sleeve, her face glowing with excitement and something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. She signed quickly. "Are you mad?" "About what I said? Mad?" Rowan signed back, confused. "Why would I be mad?" "I called Maren family. I didn't ask first. I wanted it to be true." Rowan looked at Maren, who was still holding the hand-drawn card, her eyes red but her smile genuine. Then he looked back at his daughter, this brave, perceptive girl who'd been through so much and somehow remained open-hearted enough to let new people in. "You didn't need to ask," he signed. "You were right. She is family." Maren's expression crumbled, fresh tears streaming down her face. She knelt again, getting eye level with Elin, and signed slowly, "I would be honored to be part of your family." "Both of you." Other families began approaching, congratulating Elin on her presentation. The program director stopped by to tell Rowan how impressed she was with Elin's growth. Theo appeared from somewhere in the crowd. He'd been there the whole time and lifted Elin up in a bear hug that made her squeal with delight. Through it all, Rowan found himself gravitating back to Maren's side. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining. When she looked at him, the question in her eyes was clear. Are we really okay? Can we move forward from here? He squeezed her hand in answer, and the relief that washed over her face told him everything he needed to know. As the crowd began to thin, Kieran materialized beside them. "That was something," he said, nodding toward where Elin was showing Theo her card. "Your kid's got guts." "She does," Rowan agreed. "Thank you. For this morning. For helping me see clearly. That's what friends do." Kieran extended his hand to Maren. "We haven't officially met. I'm Kieran, the one who gave Rowan those gala tickets and started this whole thing." "Then I owe you quite a lot," Maren said, shaking his hand. "Thank you. Just take care of them," Kieran replied. "That's all the thanks I need." Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. They stood on the school steps, reluctant to let the moment end. Elin had gone back inside with Theo to show him her classroom, leaving the adults together. "I'm sorry," Rowan said suddenly, "for doubting you, for letting someone else's poison get between us. You don't have to keep apologizing," Maren said gently. "You had reasons to be careful. I understand that, but I should have trusted you. Should have believed what I saw with my own eyes instead of what someone put in an anonymous letter. Maybe." Maren turned to face him fully. "But you did trust me eventually. You chose to believe me even when you were scared. That's what matters." Rowan thought about the journal entries he'd read that morning, about the vulnerability it took for her to share something so private, about how she'd fired someone and changed company policies, not because she had to, but because she wanted to protect Elin, about how she'd shown up over and over, even when it would have been easier to walk away. "I love you," he said, the words coming out before he'd consciously decided to say them. "I'm terrified, and I'm probably going to mess this up sometimes, but I love you. I need you to know that." Maren's smile was radiant. "I love you too, both of you. And yes, we'll probably mess things up sometimes. That's what people do. But we'll figure it out together. Together, Rowan repeated, liking the sound of it. Elin burst out of the school doors with Theo behind her, signing excitedly about something they'd seen in her classroom. She ran to them, positioning herself between Rowan and Maren, taking both their hands. "Can we get ice cream?" she signed. "To celebrate?" "Absolutely," Maren signed back. They walked to the parking lot together. Rowan, Maren, Elin, Theo and Kieran, this makeshift family that had formed through chance and choice. As they reached the cars, Elin looked up at Rowan, her expression serious. "Dad," she signed, "are you happy?" The question was simple but profound. Was he happy? After years of just surviving, of measuring success by whether they made it through each day intact, was he actually happy? He looked at his daughter, thriving in ways he'd once thought impossible. He looked at Maren, who'd seen them both and chosen to stay. He looked at the life they were building together, messy and imperfect and real. "Yes," he signed back. "I'm happy." Elin's smile could have lit up the whole city. She squeezed both their hands once, then released them to run ahead with Theo, already planning what flavor of ice cream she'd get. Rowan and Maren followed more slowly, their hands linked, their steps matching. They didn't need to say anything. The comfortable silence between them said everything that mattered. They'd been through doubt and fear, through misunderstanding and reconciliation. They'd chosen each other despite the risks, despite their respective histories of being hurt. And now, walking toward an ordinary afternoon of ice cream and conversation, they were choosing each other again. Not a dramatic choice, not a grand gesture. Just the quiet, everyday decision to keep showing up, keep trusting, keep building something worth keeping. Behind them, the school stood solid and permanent. Inside, Elin's presentation materials were being packed away, but the message would linger about being seen, about transformation, about the power of connection. Ahead of them, the future stretched out, unknown but no longer frightening. Whatever came next, they'd face it as a family. And that was everything. 6 months later, winter had settled over the city with gentle persistence. Rowan stood in the lobby of the specialized school, watching workers install a large framed blueprint on the wall near the entrance. His design for the new accessible wing, approved, funded, and beginning construction next month. His name was engraved on a small plaque below it. Rowan Chen, Director of Accessibility Design, Nexus Learning Solutions. He still felt a flutter of disbelief when he saw his title. His work acknowledged this way. Maren stood beside him, her hand in his. They'd been living together for 2 months now, a natural progression that felt right for all of them. Elin had her own room in the new apartment, decorated with artwork from her friends and photos from the summer program. The space felt like home, in a way their old apartment never quite had, not because it was bigger or nicer, but because it held all of them. "It's beautiful," Maren said, studying the blueprint. "This is going to help so many students." "It's strange," Rowan admitted. "All those years ago I gave up architecture. Thought those dreams were dead. But they were just waiting." The school principal approached, smiling warmly. "We're so grateful for this design. The new wing will be ready by fall semester. Your daughter must be proud." "She is," Rowan said, "though she keeps suggesting improvements." "As she should," the principal laughed. "The students who use these spaces know them best." Elin emerged from a classroom down the hall, surrounded by friends, all of them signing rapidly and laughing. When she saw Rowan and Maren, she waved and headed toward them, her friends trailing behind. "Ready to go?" She signed, almost, Rowan signed back. "Come see this first." He led her to the framed blueprint. She studied it carefully, then looked up at him with shining eyes. "Your design, it's really happening." "It is." She turned to her friends and began signing excitedly, explaining what the new wing would include. Wider doorways, better lighting, visual alert systems, spaces designed specifically for deaf students to gather and communicate freely. Her friends asked questions, made suggestions, and Rowan found himself taking mental notes, genuinely considering their input. These children understood accessibility in ways most adults never would. They lived it every day. As they left the school, Elin walked between Rowan and Maren, occasionally reaching for both their hands. The easy affection between the three of them had deepened over months of shared dinners, homework sessions, weekend adventures, and quiet evenings at home. "Theo's coming for dinner tonight, right?" Aileen signed. "He is," Maren confirmed. "And Kieran? Good. I want to show them my art project." At home, Rowan started preparing dinner while Maren helped Aileen set the table. Through the kitchen window, he could see the city lights beginning to glow as evening approached. His phone sat on the counter, displaying an email he'd read earlier, an invitation to speak at a national education conference about inclusive design. A year ago, he'd been a maintenance supervisor struggling to make ends meet. Now he was being asked to share his expertise with educators and architects across the country. The change was dizzying, but he'd learned to accept it, to believe he deserved it. Kieran arrived first, bringing wine and stories from work. Then Theo, carrying a bag of pastries from Eileen's favorite bakery. They gathered around the table, this makeshift family that had formed through circumstance and choice, and shared a meal filled with conversation, laughter, and the comfortable silences of people who genuinely knew each other. After dinner, Aileen showed everyone her art project, a series of portraits of people who'd influenced her life. There was Rowan, depicted with strong, protective hands. Theo, shown with expressive, animated gestures. Her friends from school, their faces bright and open. And Maren drawn with gentle, welcoming arms. "This is who sees me," Ellen had written beneath the portraits. "And who I see back." Later, after Kieran and Theo had left and Aileen was in bed, Rowan and Maren stood together at the window, looking out at the city. He thought about the gala, about the moment that had changed everything. A woman in a luxurious suit taking the time to sign to a child everyone else had overlooked. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing us. For not giving up when I doubted you. For becoming part of our lives." Maren leaned against him. "Thank you for letting me in. For trusting me despite your fears. For building this with me." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city flicker and glow. Rowan thought about his old sketchbooks, about deferred dreams and second chances, about how sometimes the life you build is better than the one you imagined because it's shaped by real experience, real struggle, real love. Eileen's door opened, and she padded out in her pajamas, carrying her stuffed bear. "Can't sleep," she signed. They made room for her on the couch between them, and she curled up, content and secure. Rowan remembered all the nights he'd sat alone with her, wondering if he was doing enough, if she'd be okay, if they'd make it through. He remembered the loneliness, the fear, the weight of responsibility that never lifted. Now, sitting here with his daughter and the woman he loved, he felt that weight transformed into something else. Not burden, but purpose. Not isolation, but connection. "Not fear, but hope, Dad." Aileen sighed drowsily. "Are you happy?" She asked him that sometimes, as if checking, as if making sure the good things were real and lasting. "Yes, sweetheart," he signed back. "I'm very happy." "Good," she signed. Then, with the wisdom of a child who'd learned early that love requires both courage and clarity. "Me too." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, three people who'd found each other against the odds sat together in the warm light of home, choosing each other again in the quiet, everyday way that mattered most. The blueprint at the school would help future students. The work Rowan did would create accessible spaces for thousands. But this simple moment of connection, of being seen and seeing in return, this was the foundation everything else was built on. One person had chosen to see them, and that choice had opened a door to a different life. A better life. A life where visibility and connection weren't luxuries, but realities they'd built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. And that was everything.